In this movie, we'll take a look at the second half of the stroke panel, which includes the dash line and arrowhead options. Now, as usual, I've got my numbers selected here. If you're working along with me and you want to select them, all you have to do is go up to the select menu and choose the numbers command, and that will select the numbers. Totally amazing, often overlooked option here inside of Illustrator. All right, let's bring back the stroke panel. And I'm going to reduce the weight value to 6 points, and I'm also going to reset these cap and corner options. I'm going to change the cap back to butt cap, and I'm going to change the corner back to miter joint, but I'm not going to set the miter limit to 150. I'm going to take that down to 10x, like so that we don't have a lying number 3 because of the Pinocchio nose, don't you know? All right, I'll bring back the stroke panel here. And now I'm going to turn off dash line. And by the way, the reason I reset these options is because they can end up affecting dashed lines. Each dash, for example, is affected by the cap setting, and we'll see what that looks like in a later movie. But for now, I'm going to turn on dashed line. And these are the values I came up with. A dash value of 12 point and a gap value of 1 point. But you can increase either of those values. In this case, I'm increasing the gap value so that we now have 12-point gaps between each dash. And if you really want to get complicated, then you can create dash and gap series up to 3 pairings. So I could say, you know what, then I want a 6-point dash, and then I want a 3-point gap, and we end up getting this effect here. You can get as elaborate as you want. I'm just going to set the gap value to 1, and then I'll delete the second dash and gap value. So you delete dash, and the gap value goes away too. Notice this wonderful setting here that aligns the dashes to the corners and the endpoints, adjusting the length of the dashes to fit. So if I turn it off and I just go back to preserve the exact values, then we may end up with things getting cut off at different locations. It's not quite as noticeable as it might be if I crank this gap value up. And you can see, for example, over here on the 4, that the dashes don't necessarily align to the corners. Whereas if I go ahead and turn on this new function, which is on by default, then we have perfect alignment at each one of the corners. And Illustrator just goes ahead and scales the dashes and gaps as need be. Anyway, I'm going to restore that gap value once again to 1 point. Next, let's take a look at the arrowheads. Now, the arrowheads are going to appear at the endpoints. So, for example, I could go ahead and set the end arrowhead. So there's one arrow for the end of the path and another arrowhead for the beginning of the path. Of course, you don't always know which is which when you're drawing path outlines in Illustrator. But what you can do is just experiment and find out. And I'm going to switch over to arrow 4 here, which is going to create these ginormous arrowheads way too big. So I'll go ahead and change that value to 25% there in order to take it down. And that's going to be measured, by the way, as a percentage of the line weight. So as you increase the line weight, the arrowhead is going to grow as well. And if you get it wrong, by the way, you can just swap by clicking on this little swap start and end arrowheads, and you'll end up getting this effect instead. So very easy to use here. However, I'm going to switch this guy to arrow 35 is the one I'm looking for, which is a little hand. And we end up getting that effect. And then I'm going to switch this end guy to arrow 36 right next door, which is another hand, little bit big. Kind of totally ruin the effect. I'll take the scale value down to 25%, and we end up with these much more reasonable hands here. Now, notice that the arrowheads fit inside of the path outline. So the arrowhead doesn't go any farther than the endpoint. If you want to extend those arrowheads so that they begin at the endpoint instead of ending there, then you click on this first line icon, which goes ahead and extends those arrowheads like so. And I decided that was the better looking effect, at least where these numbers are concerned. Now, I'll tell you, dashes and arrowheads can be very useful, especially dashes, and we'll be taking a look at them in more detail in future movies, but consider that your introduction to applying dashed lines and arrowheads here inside Illustrator.